Revernauts. This is Premier Rever, and I am now in charge of a Kerbal Space Industries that we are going to call the Reverstan Space Agency. So welcome to it. I'm pretty excited. Reverstan is for those of you who haven't seen the regular series, is my country in workers' resources in the Soviet Republic. If you like city builder games, I definitely recommend it. It's a pretty good one. It's early access, so there's still some things that I hope they improve, but I've spent quite a few hours in it and enjoyed it thoroughly. They got most of the beginning bugs worked out. Some game mechanics I think could be improved, and there are still a few bugs. But anyway, that's not why we're here. We're here to take a man to the moon and return him safely back to Earth. That will be the goal for this series. If the series proves popular, if there's a bunch of you following it, then I will continue. There's no reason to watch either or series, though in the other series, the Workers and Resources, I will be giving them updates as to how our space program is doing. Of course, I'm not going to mention any of the failures. I will only mention our successes in our Soviet Republic. So that's the way it works. So from now on, though, while I'm here, I'm going to refer to myself as Chief Engineer Rever at that point. I think that's a little more appropriate for this series. So, and I hope you guys enjoy it. Now, because I am so all-powerful in both things, I am going to take a minute and step back in time, and I am going to restart this game. So we're in the map, but I'm going to do a time warp so that you guys can see exactly the settings that I've selected. And, that way, I always like it when people show you exactly how they're starting, so there's no doubt. If you want to do a follow through with me or, play along, then you'll know exactly the settings. In addition, I will have a list in the description of all of the different mods. I use CCAN, and I'll also leave a link for that. And whatever other pertinent notes, even if I'm forgetting to say it right now, but you'll be able to get all of the mods that I have in here. And hopefully that will set you up exactly like this if you want to follow along with playing. Okay, let me turn on my magic time warping, and I will see you a couple minutes ago. Okay. Isn't that an impressive ability? Here we are before the start of the game that we were just in. Nothing like video editing. In any event, let's start a game. Like I said, I just want to be able to show you the exact settings, so I know when people talk about the settings, it's often not the same. So we're going to start a new one, and I want to call it Reverstan Space Agency, and it'll be a career mode, and we have our own flag. I'm not sure how well you guys can see it, but it's the Soviet star with RSA underneath, so we'll select that one. There we go. And really, this is not too complicated, but what I want to do is go over to, this is normal start, and I'll leave it almost everything normal, but I want to change a couple things. I don't want the crews to respawn. So if a crew dies, that's it, they're dead. I want to increase our science up to 140%. And the reason is I don't want to do any of the rewards for research. So in other words, if we come here, I have one of the mods is Contract Configurator, right? And if you select the field research one, you can actually turn all of these off, right? So that we won't do any field research contract types. So that will cut down a lot. Now we may go and do, like you can still do science and get science for driving around, but we're not going to get any bonus contracts. And I really don't want to get into the airplanes. This is about launching a man to the moon. And so therefore we're going to kind of stick with that theme. And I don't want it to be, this is not intended to be the hardest KSP thing that you ever saw. It's just, I'd like to actually spend more time talking about the different physics behind things than worrying about things being so hard. So If we come into advanced, the other thing that I would like to do is require a signal for control, which will make it harder. So we're, making some things a little easier, making a couple things a little harder. So, but I would still call it a pretty normal start. But this is pretty significant. This means you can't just launch to the moon unless you have the right antenna. And that also means you have to figure out which antenna you need. And I'll show you what I mean. That's not overly hard, but you just can't control anything. And if it goes behind the moon, then you can't control it unless you have a satellite and a relay kind of set up behind the moon, right? So if you wanted to go to the next step, kind of, the next level of the game after moon landings, you really need to set up like a satellite relay network out in space to help, boost your signals and make sure you're not behind the planets and all that kind of thing. It really does add quite a strategic challenge to some of your space flights to have that checked. But there you go. So we'll go ahead and accept that. And we'll hit start. And once we get in here, I am going to pause it real quick and then actually record the first part of the video. So I will see you guys in a second. Okay, well here we are in the game with no science and only 25,000 rubles, let's say, right? So we need to make some money for our space program, but we also, almost more importantly, need to make some science. So as I said, we will be getting a little bit of an extra science bonus, which is good. And again, that really will just, in this series, you're just not going to see many airplanes. And if you've played KSP before, you'll know that flying around and collecting science from specific parts of the planet, you almost have to do in order to advance. So I'm hoping that 140%, avoids that. Now, if we come in here, you'll notice that we don't have any of those research contracts available, which would have given us a bit of a science bonus at times. Now, like I said, we will go and collect science from around the planet, but we're just not going to do it necessarily with airplanes. Like if we land on the water or something along those lines, you can collect, while landed on the water kind of science. The main thing I would like to focus on is the SETI contracts, which is, it is just, I don't really quite understand, the SETI contracts exactly, in the sense that SETI is the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, and I don't know how that actually relates to this, but SETI is a cool name, so I guess that's why they did it. I don't usually use this all tab, so let's go into the available. So what we want to do, and by the way, we also have unmanned before manned. And because we've turned off, like, we will kill the Kerbals. And I don't really want to kill too many of them. If we can avoid it, it becomes an issue, even if I am a heartless dictator of a Soviet republic. That it's just not good to kill your Revernauts, I'll call them. So in any event, what we want to do, hopefully get this done in this episode. We'll see how it goes. I'm going to limit the episodes to an hour or so at the most. Some might be a little bit shorter. Probably won't be much longer than that, just because it starts running into issues with software, the rendering. All right, so anyway, the contracts, this is definitely a contract that we want to attempt to get, right? Now, I don't know if we're going to be even able to do it. And we're definitely going to want to try to escape the atmosphere. But when we only have the ability to get 2 contracts, I don't like to pick too many, because we might have another one pop up that's better for us, right? But I think I want to pick this, record of 18 kilometers. So let's go ahead and get that one. And that'll be our first goal for I don't even know if we're going to make it on our first flight, but we'll see if we can, right? We're going to try to finagle it, so to speak. Now, what the problem we have is we're going to be very limited in building over here. So the first thing that you almost always want to do, I got it. So he's just telling you how to build a little bit, and I kind of already know that. And if you don't, he doesn't really tell you that much anyway. You're better off watching a YouTube video. So we're going to do manned before unmanned, and we're going to tend to use this SETI probe stack, which gives us some ability to control the aircraft in lieu of having a command pod or the more Soviet-looking Onion reentry module. We'll have this, and we won't have to worry about killing our Kerbals, especially as we're learning and have limited science. And there we go. So when you click on that one, it just places it in a starting location. I want to point out too that if you're not sure about these parts, if you right click on them, it sort of pins the thing open, and in addition, not pins it open, but pops it open, and it stays there so you can use your mouse on it. This will explain to you in more detail exactly what's in there. So what's important about this is that we have remote pilot assistance. You know, we have command. That's the important thing. We can command the vehicle. We have a reaction wheel. So in other words, this will give us a slight amount of control based on this amount of torque, so that we'll have a very slight amount of control. Let's just put it that way. But it will be control. We'll be able to move the vehicle slightly using gyroscopes, basically. The other way you would tend to move a vehicle is either with fins or engine gimbaling, and we can explain that later. SAS, nice to have. That means the computer can try to hold our position. We don't actually have to fly the vessel ourselves. We have a telemetry report, which is, just a report we can give about where we're at in space, but it does give us a little bit of science. And we also have a temperature, be able to log the temperature, which means we won't have to put a temperature gauge on any vessel that already has this. We might put a barometer or other measuring devices, but we won't have to do, a separate temperature you can have more than one experiment if you plan on keeping a bunch of data. And I'll get into what that means as opposed to sending the data back through an antenna. So, signal processing. And the other thing to note is that we do have a very limited antenna on here, which will be good enough for our initial flights, which is good because we don't have a parachute yet. So anything we send up is going to come back down to the Earth in a quite rapid fashion, leading to its destruction. So we will have to do that. And then we also have a battery included in this thing, which will give us a limited charge. 200 is not bad for the limited equipment that we're likely to have. Now you should keep in mind that whenever we use our reaction wheel, we're going to be using some of that electrical charge. So again, I think we'll be okay, but something to keep in mind at that point. All right, so there we go. So we have that, and I'm not going to explain every part that we put in such detail, but I thought it would be interesting to see, that you can look at that. And it is important to understand how each of these parts works, right? So even if I don't explain them all in detail, it's good to know you can get that information from there. All right, so now here we are. We are talking about building a ship that can go up to 18 kilometers. Now, I don't know how much control we're going to have, because this is going to be a very limited amount of control, but we're going to give it a shot to see if we can't get there. Now, at this point, we have almost nothing. So what I want to do, just real quick, is take a look at these. Now, if we were to put these parts on there's a couple ways you can do this. You can actually look at how much fuel, like if we right click here, you can scroll. So you have a burn time of 27 seconds and you have this much thrust, right? Now, one of the easier things, one of the most important, probably the most important stat in all of Kerbal Space Program is called delta V. And the reason that that's so neat is that, or so important, is that regardless of the mass of the vessel, it tells you in theory how fast in a vacuum, like in space, that you could accelerate that vehicle. So let's just say we come up here and slap that guy on. Right, we're going to be able to change our velocity of this vehicle by 2,667 meters per second. Right, so that will blast this vehicle pretty high up there. This will be pretty good, right? And now the problem is, whatever we use here on our first experiment is just going to come crashing back down to Earth. This thing is also, let's see what the weight is here, 4.2 tons. So this is a pretty big and heavy thing. the other option we have is this thing that cost us $45 or rubles, right? So even though it would only get us, if you notice, like you're paying an awful lot more, 10 times as much, or more than 10 times as much, 15 times as much, something like that, for this, versus just putting this together and shooting it up there and seeing how high it goes, right? But there's something that almost everyone does when they first start out. We can launch this, even though we're not even ready to launch it. And, you know what? I'm sorry. I should have, we're going to do a little bit of a cheat here. It's not exactly, we're going to go back to revert the flight back to the vehicle assembly because I want to add one more thing to our little guy here. I am going to come into science because I know we have a barometer. What we're going to do is we're going to pop back out there and we're going to collect all the science off of this vehicle, which isn't that much, but it's enough for us to go into our research and development area and get a little bit of science. We can actually purchase some things, and with those things we'll be able to at least do a little bit better aircraft. Or I keep saying aircraft. I guess it is an aircraft, but it's really a spaceship. Well, calling this a spaceship's probably even a stretch because I doubt it would get into space. Well, it wouldn't get into space, but all right, so let's click perform all science, and I think that's a mod that lets us do that, right? So here we are. We now have each of the experiments that's possible on this. Now we can transmit them back or we can keep them. And in this case, because I'm just going to recover the vessel, I'll show you that in a second, we're just going to keep each of these. The benefit to being able to transport them is when we go up in space, this aircraft, this spaceship is going to crash back to Earth. We would lose any experiments that we kept. So when we do blast off, we're going to transmit them back. That way we don't lose the science, even though we'll lose the vessel. So there we go. So we kept all of those experiments. And then we're going to come up, if you kind of go above this symbol, it pops open this when you're on the ground. We can either go to the Space Center or we can recover. And we just want to recover, which means, retake all the parts and reuse them. So we get this screen where it's saying, okay, you've gained 8 science for keeping, and it'll explain to you where you got each science from, which is the same as those other screens showed us. And if we hit next, it'll show us, well, we got all of our parts back, so we didn't lose any money. If we notice, fuel is one of the things. So if you do land back with some fuel, it will, give you a refund for your fuel. There we go. So now the fact is we can go into having done almost nothing, right? I think, did we get a milestone? Yeah, look, we got a milestone. So you'll see these. They give you a different reward. So we got a few bucks for that, right? Now we also have, the reason we don't have 25,000 is we got a advance on our contract. So if we look at active, so you get a $4,000 advance. So it didn't hurt to get that milestone, get an extra couple bucks. So now here's our research screen, and if we try to zoom out, you can see with these mods it adds a lot. If you've played the vanilla, you don't have quite this many choices, and it does rearrange some of them to sort of force you into certain activities. Obviously when you can get technologies is greatly going to impact. I mean, it's the biggest limit as to what you can do. Well, there is money, but the lack of science and the lack of research is a big thing in the game. Now, we really want to get all of these initial things. I mean, they're not that expensive. We don't have much science, but probably one of the biggest things I want to get is this survivability, because that'll give us parachutes, which is pretty key in being able to land in other places and do science, and it just also saves you a good amount of money because everything you launch doesn't, just become junk, exploded parts on the ground. So we have a couple different choices here. And what I think we'll do is I definitely want to get this Engineering 101 because it's a step closer to the survivability. It also gives us the possibility of using a decoupler. Right, and if we can get that decoupler, that means we can do different stages and get much higher into the sky. So let's go ahead and do that research. And it's more like purchasing as opposed to actually, like a lot of games, you have to spend time researching. This is just, you're really buying things with points. Now, we could take a look at the other things. Like this structural parts is just one, but none of the, I mean, the most useful thing is, well, a lot of things are useful here, but the most useful is probably this mobility enhancer where your guy can get in and out of the, it's a ladder for climbing up and down the spaceship. It also makes it handy to grab onto if you're floating around in space. We don't need that yet. We're just setting up a probe. But anyway, so we're not going to get that. Early aviation is nice because it gives you a lot more controllability. In particular, where is it? There's a tail fin here. There, see, this tail fin is movable. So even though they're rather expensive, it means we could have some control over our aircraft using aerodynamics. And considering that we're not even going to make it out of the atmosphere, that would be pretty key to getting our craft to be able to maneuver. So let's go ahead and get this as well, since we have enough science. Now, if we didn't have that science bonus of 40%, we probably wouldn't have been able to buy those two initially. So, but you'll see, there will come a point when these things, like all of a sudden you need 45. So, you know, these initial ones are extremely cheap, but that bonus, I'm hoping, keeps us going without turning it into too much of a grind. So in any event, let's move forward. And here we are, back in the Space Center. And we can come back over to our vehicle assembly building. And if you are a keen-eyed observer, you will notice that we have more parts. And those parts are this retro cockpit, which is actually more for airplanes, so you can stick it to your spacecraft. And we also have this external command seat, which is more for like buggies in the sense of like a lunar rover or even a Kerbal/Earth roamer. We can build a little roamer, and actually each of these spaces in the Space Center has its own science bonus. So we will probably go ahead and do that at some point fairly soon, probably not this episode. And if we come over to our coupling, you'll notice that we now have this decoupler. So what we can do is we could come over here, and even though it looks goofier than Sin, we can put a decoupler on this, right? And if we want to, we can then take another engine and set it on here. So now that's far from ideal, right? But we're not exactly, you know, we're not exactly NASA here with our funding and whatnot. Now we have a milestone, which I think we already went over, so let's get rid of that. And so we could now launch this, and we would have two different stages, right? We would fire the first stage, and then we would fire the second stage, which it's actually kind of three stages, right? They're making this, and you can see it hovers green. So I think I'm going to move this like that. So as soon as I hit the button to go to the next stage, once this rocket burns out, it will just immediately decouple and fire this engine off. There's no real reason to wait. Now we have this aerodynamics category, which is why we bought that other science. And I want to look for the tail fin. And I'm going to hit the X button, or you can click down here. See, if I click, it goes to double mode, and we can put two on at a time. If I hit X again, triple, quad. So now these are rather expensive compared to the rest of our craft. So far, this craft costs us $1,049, right? Rubles, whatever. But I'm going to plop four of those on. And look, now all of a sudden the price is way higher. Now I want to scale these down. And if you notice, when I scale them down, it also scaled down the price greatly. So in other words, if you put on bigger parts, it costs you more money. But so our whole craft and launching it will cost $2,090, which really, in my opinion, is not too bad, right? So let's click there, and now we have this. Now normally you would probably want to put your fins down on the bottom of your rocket. The reason being, when you think about how the rocket works, you have this thrust coming from the bottom. And I think the best way to picture it is, imagine you put your finger, this is like a stick, right? And at the bottom, so imagine trying to balance a stick on your finger. That's kind of what you're doing when you're launching these rockets, which is why it's so easy for them to flip upside down and go haywire. So it's far better for the rocket if you have your control surfaces, down lower. This is going to turn the top of the rocket, and the problem is if you try to turn the top of the rocket too much, it can kick out the bottom. So I'm hoping that this works. I don't know that it will. I think it's a simple enough craft that we shouldn't have too many problems. I'm hoping. And again, we're just going to try to get in the air and hopefully get up to 18,000 meters. If we can do that, we can get our first thing accomplished. Now, one of the things that we have here is, or problems even that we have, and we need to find it. Yeah, if we click here, let's close this. Yeah, there you go. Notice that we have a thrust to weight ratio listed over here, right, on our first stage. And the reason is, and this thrust to weight ratio is very important because it's how much, it's really almost like how many G's you would pull if you understand what a G is. Like G is, so if you're at 2, you're going to go up at 2 G's, meaning you're going to be accelerating twice as fast. If you would just have 1 thrust to weight ratio, you're not going to move at all, right? So you want to kind of limit how fast you're accelerating in the atmosphere because the faster you go, the more drag you're going to have, the more fuel you're going to waste. So you want to kind of find this nice balancing line to have a nice thrust to weight ratio so that you don't end up going up so fast that you slow yourself down, if that makes sense. So we want to be able to get the most bang for our fuel buck, in a sense. So what I'm going to do, just for this simple vessel, you can play around with it. At times we may even launch things just to see how well it goes, and then with the kind of like a simulator, we'll launch it just to see how it goes. So I'm going to turn this thrust to weight ratio down or up again till it's about 1.5. See that? I'm not sure if you guys can read that now, but we've reduced the amount of thrust, which is a force, right? And the thrust to weight ratio is kind of giving you it doesn't matter what the weight of the vehicle is. You don't have to worry about how massive it is at that point. You can just know that if you have this, it's going to give you an idea of the acceleration. And like I said, or like I'm trying to say and not getting it out very well, this is a force and how hard you're going to be pushed up, and it's going to push against the mass of the ship, which is going to cause an acceleration. So in other words, acceleration is going to be equal to the force divided by the mass. So, or in a more common format, you may have heard of it, force equals mass times acceleration. So if you re-solve that math equation, acceleration equals force divided by mass. So in other words, that is what the thrust to weight ratio is, put in terms of g-force. So that you know if you're at 1, you're just going to hover. If you're at 2, you're going to accelerate at the same speed that gravity's pulling down, if that makes any sense. All right, anyway, I hope that made sense. Now we need to do the same thing for the other one, right? So if we pop this one open, we're at 6.42. Now, there is one other thing to keep in mind. So let's turn this down until it's at about the same 1.5, right? Because that's going to be a nice, I don't want to say leisurely, but it'll get us going into the air, hopefully fast enough. Now, when you're doing rockets, if you've ever heard like when they're, like when the one famous scene when the space shuttle blew up, they're saying, go for throttle up, right? And that, when you have a rocket, you can actually control, these are just boosters, which just burn like a bottle rocket. It's just one speed the whole time. If you have a rocket, then you can actually, as you burn off fuel, you can adjust your throttle and keep your speeds better. And that's what they do when they launch most, a lot of space vehicles, like something that's when they launched the space shuttle in particular, they were using, after the solid rocket boosters, they were using the rocket engines themselves, and they could actually help adjust their speed with that. And we'll get into that in this. Okay. So anyway, am I going on too much about other things? Well, there we go. So we got our thrust to weight ratio. Another thing to keep in mind is as we burn off fuel in either one of these, what's going to happen is the mass of the vehicle is going to go down and our thrust to weight ratio is going to increase. So as this rocket burns off fuel, we're going to get an added, it's going to accelerate faster. So this is sort of, in some ways, you can look at as the minimum thrust to weight ratio that you're going to have. And as it burns through that 36 seconds of burning, the thrust to weight ratio is going to keep going up. And we might end up at 2 or 3 or 4 thrust to weight ratio, depending on how you're doing. Okay, so there you go. Now, these are the same engines, and this is a good example too, right? The same exact boosters. I guess they're not actually, well, they are engines in a way, but whatever. Notice that this one has pretty much twice the thrust. And the reason for that is this one, when it's burning, has twice the mass, right? It's got to lift this engine, which isn't burning. It doesn't have twice the thrust, I should say. It has twice the weight that it has to lift up. So it's only going to change your velocity half as much. Good. So these things sometimes are intuitive, but I don't think it hurts to understand them fully, especially in this game. So anyway, let's go launch a space vehicle before I go on for too long. All right, here we go. So I'm not even going to save this. It will auto-save if we come back to open, which we don't. Oh, no, cancel. If we were to come back to open when there's no vehicle here, you'll see that this auto-saves every time you launch. So this is not a vehicle we're going to reuse too much. Let's put it that way. Not past this episode. By the time we want to try to get out of the atmosphere, this won't work. My hope with this one is that we can get up there, get enough science, maybe even break the 18,000. Hopefully our control surfaces actually kind of work. So I'm going to turn on SAS, and you can see it's just giving you kind of a scrambled error right there. You might see that during flight at times. It means it's not able to keep up with the changes. But the reason we're getting it now is because we're not moving. Now, we could pick prograde or we could pick retrograde, but what we wanted to do is this stability assist, which is just try to keep us going in the direction we're already going. And I say try because it doesn't always, if it's not able to make that maneuver, it's not going to be able to, like, if you don't have enough control, you're going to start seeing this message popping up or this symbol popping up. Prograde means in the direction of flight. Retrograde means against the direction of flight. It's a little bit important when you're launching, but it's the most important when you're up in space, and we'll get into that in the future. All right, so let's go. Let's just launch this bad boy and see what happens. Now, one of the problems we're going to have in the very beginning, and you can see we're rotating slightly and we're going off course. So I'm going to try to pull this guy back myself because see we're getting that symbol that it's kind of uncontrollable. Once we get going faster, we're going to get more control. See how we're just not doing enough, to keep this thing straight. We're not going fast enough to actually control it. So now it should get more controllable. I'm going to let off the controls. There we go. See, now that we don't have that bottom part, let's stop rolling and try to get this guy going back up. Yeah, see, this is not going as well as I had hoped because we're just not going fast enough. So we might have taken too much thrust off of our thrust to weight ratio, right? Now the fact that we're going sideways, yeah, see, it's just not a very controllable vehicle. And we're just not able to get enough up direction. We're blasting off into the distance and not going straight up. So I don't think we're going to make it. I don't think we're going to make it to our 1800, It's just not controllable enough. And we lost the pointing straight up too early. See, now we're starting to travel back down. So what we're going to do real quick is we're going to come here and we're going to say perform all science. And then we're going to hopefully transmit all of these before we splash back down to Earth. Well, yeah, we're going to definitely splash back down. And the reason we're hoping to get all those transmitted is because, without that extra science, this was a complete waste of money, right? So we didn't make our contract, but we did get, some bonuses here. Let's close that. Yeah, there we go. So we launched the first vessel. We broke speed records. We broke altitude records. We got a little extra prestige because we went over a certain speed. And yeah, let's hope we get this. So I'm just going to close all that. We broke a land distance record. So we're getting, we got some kudos for that, and we got some extra dollars for whatever reason for breaking those records. Not sure why people would pay you dollars for that, but there we go. So we uploaded 100% of the data so that at least we will get some science. Yep, see probe stack done, so it's done transmitting, which is good. So now we can watch ourselves crash and burn into the ocean. Rather loud, wasn't it? All right, well, I guess explosions are loud. So now that we're in the ocean, usually you can come up here if you still have a vessel and tell it to recover. You can either wait, and then at some point in a few seconds, it will pop up this window. And you can choose to kind of cheat and say, oh, that was a failure. Let's go back to the assembly. We're going to try to avoid doing that. I may at times do that, but what I would rather do is say we're going to be rather than actually launch a vehicle, especially if I'm worried about it actually working, we may call it a simulator mode where we just run through the launch and see if it actually works like we expect, because it's not official, if that makes sense. Like we would have a computer that we would do that. Well, anyway, we're going to return to the Space Center. And having completely failed, we can't recover the vessel like we did the last time. But you'll notice we now have 22.4 science, which is pretty key because, that will allow us to get more of these parts. And with more of these parts, we can almost certainly build a craft that's going to be getting all the way up there. Now, as I said before, survivability is a pretty big one. We get a couple really good things. We get some more batteries. We get a heat shield, which will be absolutely critical in the future. And we also get parachutes. In addition to that, we can get, service bay is nice to have. This is a different heat shield, a little bit different size. And we can get solar panels, photovoltaic cells. So that's really key to being able to get your craft to, not only will we have batteries. Now, the problem with this is, besides being able to, recover the vessel, I don't know if we're going to be able to get up high enough, and we would only have 6 points left, which wouldn't be enough to get any of these other things that we might want, right? So I'm thinking that we might be better off getting this basic rocketry first, even though it might cost us some more money because we can't recover the vessels. And in the next flight, there's a good chance that we'll be able to get more science and move forward, right? So I'm going to get this one first because I know getting this actual rocket engine that uses, liquid fuel and is controllable is going to be somewhat controllable. It's a big step towards moving forward, right? Just so you know, the other things that we can do is this survivability. This is really nice for this radial decoupler. I don't want to do this quite yet. Maybe. But, maybe no, I think I'm going to build like a 2-stage or a rocket. Let's just see how far up that'll take us. All right, so we're not going to research that. And then, again, we have more rocketry, which really, like this swivel engine, this is the first engine that will gimbal, they call it, which means turn its direction, and that really helps with being able to control the vehicle, especially in space, right? If you can't adjust the direction your motor's pointing, it makes it a lot harder. You have to actually point the ship in the direction you're going. You can't make any fine-tuning adjustments. And we get another different stack decoupler if we get that. But that's good enough for now. Let's see. We're really still just trying to get up past that 18,000. Okay. I just thought of something. We only have this one contract, and we're about to be able to build a better vehicle. But let's go see real quick, get back out of here. And let's just see real quick, do we have other available contracts? Yes. See, because we did some things, we triggered many more things that we can possibly do. More than I expected in actuality. So let's see. What can we... I wish you could filter this a little more easily. Like, in other words, what SETI contract can we do? I know we can go over to all and do SETI contracts, right? So what I was thinking of is that there's a chance we might escape the atmosphere if we can build a good enough vehicle that goes up, and we could get 2 of these done in one fell swoop, right? The other ones that are very interesting, they sort of come and go, is this part testing. So in other words, you know, would we want to potentially test? Now, the ones you want to look for is that are real easy to do is like on the landing pad, right? Like, so this is, wants you to haul it up and be in a certain, these can be kind of difficult to get to, especially if you're not, like, it's easier sometimes to do these with an airplane than it is actually with flying. But they're still a fun challenge. Sometimes I like to do these, but what we would look for is, you know, try see if we can have one. Orbit, in flight, escape trajectory, landed at Kerbin. So this means when you see these, it's like after you've landed back again, right? Which is, you know, what you're looking for, the ones that say on the landing pad. At the launch site. There we go. So we could test that radial decoupler if we had unlocked it at the launch site, and we'll get, you know, a science for it and all. So now the problem is I don't know if there's any under here. See the way that's, I don't know. Is it showing us them all, or is there more down below there? But in any event, I think we're going to do the escape the atmosphere one and hope for it. I don't know that we're going to make it that high. But like I said, the SETI ones are going to be our primary focus there. The other ones are good for money and a little bit of science, so we may end up doing a few of those. Some of them I could even see myself doing off camera. But let's head back to our vehicle assembly. And we are going to try to, well, we are going to get rid of all of that. And we're going to take a look at, you know, the engine that we now have. Now we also have, you know, these other parts. So like this is, you know, this is actually something that could get us fairly high up there, right? We have a pretty good thing, as long as we can control it better than we did before. And there's another part, let's see, so that gets us 2,600. If we were to go a different route, it would be to use these engines. But in order to use that engine, which is, you know, not much different, let's see, if we put this big fuel tank on here, and then came back and put this engine on, we would only get up to 2,100. Now the benefit to this one, though, and it might be a little deceiving, is that with this one, we can control the exact thrust. I don't think we can. Now this is a rocket engine, right? Let's right click on it so this stays pinned. No, this is solid fuel. So this is just, I don't think we can adjust. I don't think we can adjust on any of the solid fuel ones. This, like if we look at this one, yeah, this has fuel and oxidizer. This one we could probably adjust the throttle on. So what would this one give us? If we click on another one, we'll get rid of that. Come on. What happened there? There we go. So yeah, this may be a way to go. Let me do one other thing. We should have in structural an adapter. Now the problem with this is, it's not a big problem. It's going to cost us a fair amount. So let's just, I'm willing to see what happens for our money. This winglet I don't think is controllable. Yeah, movable pivots. Okay, so this is actually not a bad thing. So let's hit X and put 4 of these on here. Can we line them up with the color painting just so it looks a little bit better? All right, Now that's going to raise our cost up to 4,200, and we still, if we come over here and use the scroll wheel, we still don't have any parachutes. So, do we have any more science? Yes, we have a seismic accelerometer, which is only good if you're on the ground. That I'm not too worried about getting science. We might build a little buggy to drive around and get science, as I said. So I'm kind of curious to see what this will do. I mean, it should get us a good chunk into space. Now, we could talk about, going up a little bit or down. Yeah, come on. There we go. So this would cut down on the cost. It'll cut down on how much control we have. But if you notice, our feet per second is going up. I'm not sure exactly how much we would need to get out of the atmosphere, but we're in the ballpark. And that looks relatively okay, right? All right, so now, if we come over here, you'll notice, unlike the last one, we could put a limit on the amount of thrust that we are allowed to have at maximum, or we can just control it with the throttle. But unlike the other one, if you notice, we don't have an actual, it's not adjusting the actual thrust, and that's because we can do that with the engine. So let's give this guy a try. Right, we're not even going to save it. Well, maybe this will be the first one we save, right? So this will be, puncher. Because we're going to punch through the atmosphere. Puncher 1. Right, and so let's save it. There we go. So if we come up here to open, you'll see now we can always go back to puncher 1. And we can delete it if it's, once we select it, we could delete it if we get too many of them in there. But we will have puncher 1. Now, we could always go back to that old vehicle. We're not going to do that. So let's just cancel, but I wanted to show you. Yeah, I mean, we don't really need that much to make this work. This is just all going to be a waste of money. I'm almost certain, though, we're going to at least get our 1,800 goal. And we're running out of time here in the episode, so this will probably be our last launch of the day. And then we'll come back. And I think I'm going to do these episodes back to back. So if you guys have left me comments, I won't get them until, or at least I won't be able to respond to them until next week's episode of Kerbal Space Program. But by then I'll try to respond to all of the comments. Now, I'm going to use, again, my Xbox controller, though I don't know if I even mentioned that. And if you look, we can raise and lower the throttle here. So I'm going to start off with a pretty high throttle. We can even do that. I also have my Xbox to set X to 0, and the Y button gives you full throttle. We're going to turn on our SAS, and we're just going to leave it in the stability assist. Now, the reason I'm starting off with a full throttle is I want to get up to speed pretty quickly, and then I'll start cutting it down so that we don't get too much aero resistance, right? But I want to get to the point where we can control this thing relatively quickly. Now, I think these engines gimbal from what it said, which means that the engine itself can swivel, and that will help us a lot. Let's just check. You can see these surfaces are moving, right? So that's good that we'll have air control. Sometimes it's good to check these things on a new design. All right, so let's launch this thing. Oop, that's the wrong button. Let's launch this thing. And immediately, we're taking off like a rocket. So you see I'm cutting that throttle down to half. I'm going to cut it down further. See that? See how we're going too fast? So I'm just going to cut it down so we're not using nearly as much fuel. And we're not accelerating. Now, notice the throttle stayed the same, but we're starting to accelerate. That's because we're burning off fuel. But now we're not in that arrow. If you look up top there's an atmosphere gauge and a height. So as we get out of the lower atmosphere, we can go faster because we have less. So I could probably even cheat this up. I'm just trying to, not get that arrow effect to be too great. Now, when we get up too high, our fins will stop working so well, right? Because we're not going to have as much air to hit those fins, and they'll actually kind of become a liability. So we're just going to make sure we don't get any aero effects. Now we're in the highest part of the atmosphere there, right? So we're doing pretty darn well here. Now see this? Now that we cut this throttle, I can cut the throttle off. There we go. We'll turn it back on because I didn't like to see that red, right? I can see a little red forming there, which means we're kind of pushing the envelope. and I don't want that arrow to take us away. Now I think we're in really good shape here. By the way, we're gonna blast right through. We're gonna go way up too high. We're probably gonna burn up coming back down. So I might just cut it off right here, knowing that we're gonna get out of both of these. Oh, we didn't do the atmosphere one? Oh man, I thought we did the atmosphere. Well, we did escape the atmosphere at about 70,000 or so. So let's do some science now that we're in space, and then because we know this thing's just going to crash and burn, we're going to perform all science, and then we're going to transmit it. All right, so that should give us whatever science just flashed by when I didn't read it because I clicked too quickly. Yeah, so I thought I guess I didn't actually accept that other contract, I suppose. So we'll see. We'll see. We'll complete this contract. It's not like we won't get that contract at some point in the future. So there we go. High above Kerbin. Now, part of my concern is that we're going to come back down right on top of things that can actually destroy buildings. Now, we're in normal mode, so we don't get the most damage possible. But if you notice, we're still going up at quite a speed. So if we come over to... We're in staging mode. If we toggle the map, we can see here, we go into a different mode, right? And this mode is showing us the path we're going to take. And the furthest point in your orbit from whatever you're orbiting, in this case, Kerbal, we're going to go up to 183. And it's a shame it doesn't show you guys that in some place we can see. I may go get the engineering redux because it does show some more of these stats than we're able to see here. Now, yeah, I don't think, is there anything new that they've added here? No, it's really not telling us, our apoapsis and all that stuff. Now, some of that can be because we don't have any components, so maybe we will wait. McJeb gives you information about the craft as well. So once we get a McJeb flight computer on there, we'll be able to see some of that stuff a little more easily. So there we go. You can see our orbit speed's coming down. We don't have enough speed to go in orbit, but we made quite a highway up there. Pretty impressed. And we escaped the atmosphere, even though we didn't get the darn contract for it. But we'll get that one. Like I said, we're going to be escaping the atmosphere constantly. So we can come back out of here and go into staging mode. And then we can see our vessel. Now, one thing I'd like to point out to you, and I don't want to use up, I think we got all of our science, I believe, was submitted or transported, whatever word I'm looking for. What we can do here, I'll just explain to you. If we want to go retrograde, if we click on this, it'll spin the craft around. Say it thinks it's still aerodynamically it's trying to, but we have a reaction wheel on here that's letting it spin that around. But notice that our electricity goes down while it's doing that. So it's not always real good, but what that'll do is it'll point the head of the aircraft backwards from the way we're heading. Right? So if we want to go down like feet first, so to speak, you point the head of the aircraft retrograde. Right? So that this is the direction we're heading this way because I'm looking at the top of the craft. You can also change some of these things at times, like, control from here, but we're not going to get into that right now. But if you notice, we're now starting to come down over this way. Now, I'm kind of curious to see if we're going to burn up on re-entry. Another big thing about the game, we can time warp. And if we do time warp, you'll see that once we get to the atmosphere, it will slow it back down to 1. And while you're in time warp, the controls don't all work. Like if you notice that when it came off of there, it moved it back into retrograde. So now, if we put it in prograde, it will come down like a dart head first. So that's why you want to put it in retrograde, theoretically, especially if we actually had a heat shield. Now there we go. So now we're entering the atmosphere. I'm going to turn SAS off because it's just wasting electricity. It's not able to control it. And like a dart, look, it flipped us back around because of the aerodynamics. This is not exactly a vehicle. Now this red bar, something will probably, oh look, it went all the way up to the top, but it didn't quite get there. But like a dart, we are going to hit the earth with a momentous impact here in a minute. We knew that would happen because we didn't have any parachutes. Now, one of the reasons we could get away with this vehicle, without any decoupling and shields, because, oh, look at that. Oh my gosh, that's pretty amazing that anything survived. Look at that. Boy, that was I'm amazed. Yeah, say I can't do anything because it destroyed the command thing. So let's hit escape and go to the Space Center. Now, one of the things you can usually do here in the Space Center, let's see this. This is relatively close, or you can do it from the tracking station here. But we can click on that, and even though a minute ago we couldn't do anything, we can actually recover this. Now, most of it was destroyed, but theoretically we might have gotten some parts and pieces. I don't know if I didn't pay enough attention to see if we got some money back, but let's see what's going on with this contract. I thought for sure I had accepted that. Let's go over to the SETI contracts. No, we didn't. Okay, well now it's saying we have that escape the atmosphere, and yeah, let's think about it harder. But look, notice we got 43 science for that, so that's pretty darn good. We're going to be able to get our parachutes in the next episode, and we're probably going to be able to talk about either getting a manned person or a manned altitude record, getting a person up there, which now that we have parachutes is a reasonable thing to do potentially, and we'll get some science for that as well. Or we can talk about first trying to orbit, and we would have a probe that we would want to send around there. Yeah, so let's see if we can accept this contract as well. I think we'll go for the orbit first, and then we'll take, because then we'll get a little more science from having orbited, and we can make our manned flight hopefully that much safer. So there we go. So I'm going to end it here. When we come back in the next episode, which I'm going to record right after this one in real life. So like I said, if there's any comments you left, I'm not going to see them until after the next episode is done. So I'll see them in real life when this episode goes up. I just won't be able to respond to the next episode. So I will respond next Tuesday to whatever comments you leave. All right, guys. I hope you have enjoyed our first Reverstan Space Agency episode. Let me know what you think. If you have any direction that you'd like to see us go, I don't mind taking slight detours, but our goal will be to put a man on the moon so that we can increase the glory of Reverstan. So thank you guys for watching, and I will see you in the next one.